Today we're discussing the origin of the universe and what it all means, what the purpose of it all is. Across our panelists here, we've got a real range of views, starting with Dr. Craig, who represents traditional Christianity, Jessica Frazier, Hinduism, Philip Goff, alternative weird concepts of God, and Joe Foley representing atheism. So we've got the real spectrum there across the board. Dr. Craig, let's start with you. A fundamental question at the heart of today's discussion. Where did reality come from? Where is it headed? And why does it matter?
Okay, thank you, Joe. In thinking about the question, where did reality come from? Where is it headed? And why does it matter? It's important to determine whether or not reality is meant to comprise God or not, because very different answers will be given to that question based upon what you take reality to include. I think the question will be much more interesting if we take the term reality to mean physical reality. Where did physical reality come from? Where is it headed? And why does it matter? Now, if physical reality did not come from God, if physical reality is all there is, then the universe and everything in it are doomed to destruction. As the universe expands, the stars burn out, the energy is used up. Eventually, there will be no light, there will be no heat, there will be no life. The universe will become a thin gas of elementary particles, endlessly expanding into the endless recesses of darkness and outer space. And therefore, many atheists have recognized that if God does not exist, then our lives are ultimately meaningless. For no matter what we do, it really doesn't matter, because everything winds up the same regardless. Now, you can try to make up a meaning to your life, but that's purely subjective. That's just pretending that your life has meaning. But objectively speaking, your life remains without significance or importance on an atheistic view. And therefore, the critical question is, did physical reality come from God? If physical reality came from God, then that gives man hope for life beyond the grave. On the Judeo-Christian view, the physical universe is headed towards the new heavens and the new earth, which God will usher in. Our destiny is to live with God and to enjoy Him forever. And therefore, the choices that we make during this lifetime are imbued with an everlasting and eternal significance. So, does physical reality come from God? Well, in the course of my philosophical work, I've defended 6 arguments for God's existence in support of a positive answer to that question. First, God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists, rather than just nothing. Second, God is the best explanation of the absolute beginning of the universe at a point in the finite past. Third, God is the best explanation of the uncanny effectiveness of mathematics in describing physical phenomena. Fourth, God is the best explanation of the incomprehensible fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent, interactive agents. Fifth, God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and duties in the world. And finally, number 6, the very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists. So on the basis of these arguments, which I've defended at length in my published work, I think we have a very powerful, cumulative case in support of a theistic answer to tonight's question. There is no comparable case for atheism. And therefore, it seems to me that theism provides not only the most hopeful, but also the most reasonable answer to tonight's question.
Joe, your thoughts? Where does it all come from? What's the point of it all?
I think that there are a couple of different things. I mean, I think that I probably refer to myself more as an agnostic than an atheist, which I think is kind of the only position you can take at 26. But I think that there are, and I think there'll probably be a surprising number of ways in which Dr. Craig and I probably end up agreeing. The point that I would be very interested to talk about partly because I don't think it's talked about all that much, is that when we talk about meaning in the context of life, I think there are a couple of things that are worth saying. The first is that I think we ought not to be fooled by a kind of an illusion cast on us by language here, whereby we hear what is the meaning of life, and we are necessarily fixed into a kind of reified view of the question. We think, okay, there must be this thing called meaning out there, and we need to find it. I think that if we look at the way that we use the term meaning, and we look at the way that we talk about people's lives being meaningful or not meaningful, it seems to me at least, to refer to a number of different related but ultimately distinct things, some of which I think are plausibly more meaningful with the existence of God, some of which I think are less meaningful with the existence of God, and some of which it doesn't seem to make much of a difference either way. But I largely want to explore the kind of polysemy there, almost. So like one example of where I think God, like straightforwardly and I think pretty uncontroversially would make someone's life more meaningful, is in duration. So I think that, regardless of where you stand on theism or naturalism or atheism or agnosticism or any of these terms, it is certainly plausible to say something like, there are things in your life that you find meaningful now. Theism, with a kind of afterlife rolled into it, will entail that there will be more life, and thus plausibly more of these things that you find meaningful and fulfilling, however you end up cashing out that term. And I think that's a very straightforward way in which theism would make life more meaningful. The classic counter to that, which I'm actually not necessarily sure that I vibe with as much. Just because I'm an agnostic doesn't necessarily mean that I think that life has to be more meaningful without God. Those are two entirely separable propositions. But for example, something that Jean-Paul Sartre talks about, classic Frenchman, really values freedom, as I'm sure all French people do, talks about the idea of actually being freed from this kind of pre-existing essence, which might be more recognizable as a kind of telos, would make, in his view, life more meaningful. I suspect that the question of whether your life is experienced as more meaningful or less meaningful is going to depend on two things. It's going to depend on, probably to a certain extent, your particular psychological disposition, right? If we're cashing this out as a kind of empirical claim made about how somebody feels in their life depending on what particular propositions they believe, there's no reason why this has to have one universal answer for all people. A great many things in human psychology vary between people. But secondly, it's going to probably depend on what definition of meaning you're leaning most heavily on. So there are a few different ways that I think we cash out meaning. One is just straightforward things you find fulfillment and joy in. Another, which is, these are all related, but they are separate. Another is something you're willing to expend effort over, a straight line, a goal, in kind of Nietzsche's famous terminology, but also in Marcus Aurelius, right? Talks about the need for a sort of aim to life. Another might be what you're willing to experience pain over, right? And there's also, different dimensions through which we can talk about meaning, right? There are arguments about what might plausibly make any given person's life more meaningful, and there are also more kind of individual framings of meaning. The other thing that I think is worth talking about here, sorry, I realize I'm just banging on about things, but is that I think there is a difference. I think one thing that's worth acknowledging about meaning is even if you do end up with a very subjectivist idea of meaning, it doesn't necessarily mean it's in your control, right? I think about this in terms of beauty, right? Beauty, most people are far more comfortable talking about subjectivism in beauty than they are in things like ethics and even in things like meaning. But nonetheless, it remains true that you can't choose what you find beautiful, right? If somebody shows me like a dog turd on the street, I can't choose to find that beautiful. It is, importantly, although it's kind of framed through my experience, it's outside of the direct control of my experience. I think that is important. It changes how we interact with these things. So I don't know. That's quite a lot of disparate thoughts, but that's.
Well, if dog turd on the streets makes the world more meaningful, you'll love Birmingham, Joe. It's full of meaning. Jessica, Hindu worldviews, they cover a huge range of different perspectives on the origin of the world, on the purpose of individuals' lives, or the purpose of the cosmos more generally. What's your view and your take on the story of the universe?
Okay, well, first, I want to say that if you look at the wider world and its ideas, We need to let go of the past. Everyone's like, it's either it was God, a guy with a beard and a toga, or it was matter, and matter is meaningless stuff. And there's a kind of a dichotomy that Western civilization has gotten stuck in, of like being between this like radical secularism, it's only matter and it has no real innate significance, and it's what we see through empirical observation, or it's like, it's God and he's a person with a specific plan and he's like a guy and you better build a good relationship with him or he won't like you, and you learn about him from scripture, and there's a very specific narrative there as well, right? Actually, most of the world wasn't necessarily caught between those two extremes, and there are people in the West who like found other ways through, and so we're all moderns here. Every generation thinks they're the moderns, but anyway, we're the moderns, and we can decide for ourselves. So let's start from the beginning. I'm interested in 3 Indian arguments that try to say, back from when there wasn't a divide between the secular and the sacred, just what is this that we're in? Argument 1. If we look at everything in the world around us, all these people, we tend to just see the objects. We need to remember to see the connections, the spaces, the continuum, the way in which everything we see is unified in some sense through causes, through space-time relations. If Bradley's regress, there's an argument for the unity of the cosmos that India also makes. So we're in a unified world. 2, second of third arguments. Also look at what's happening in us and around us. We're the product of powers and forces and patterns and order of nature that sometimes in metaphysics is called powers. The fact that we continue through time, building, growing, following this trajectory, this telos, as Aristotle put it, is in itself extraordinary. If there was no order in the universe, everything could fly apart at any moment. What causes this, what explains this, what is the nature that's unfolding in this order, a kind of a modal anchor that gives the world its shape, that is some fundamental nature of everything. Leibniz talks about this, Spinoza does a bit as well. So we've got a unified world and one with a kind of a fundamental shape that has an order to it. And the third argument says, look at the way the world is built in levels of one of the most important things that we can see in our world, emergence. Every time matter kicks up a step, from fields to particles to matter to life, which is not a physical thing, it's a kind of a process, to consciousness, which has new capacity. But the West, again, is a bit stuck in like matter, consciousness, matter, consciousness. It's a side quest that Descartes sent us on. Okay, fine, but there's more than that. Plato is better than Descartes. Consciousness makes qualia, the feeling of things that enables beauty. That it also involves imagination, and imagination's amazing. Every single person in this room contains worlds, the potential for infinite worlds, stories, values, beauty, art. Go home at the end of this and listen to a piece of beautiful music and see emergence at work through humans creating higher levels of being. That is the inalienable power of every single person here. We're like transformers of matter, of being itself. So we've got these 3 arguments want to say, look, we're in a world that is unified, that has this incredible coherent power and a fundamental nature that is creatively generating not just matter and mind, but beauty, art, meaning, virtue, things like kindness, which is a strange, sometimes useless, but very beautiful value. All of this is ours. It's part of what we are. It's part of the very nature of what we do. And in a way, I want to say to everyone, this is what we've got. Something is generating it. Don't let me or anyone else tell you whether it's divine or not divine, God or matter. Those words might be misleading. You decide what its value is. The ancient Indians eventually said, you know what? This is crazy. This is amazing. This is beautiful. I think it's extraordinary. Call it divine, right? You decide what word you want to use and you decide its value, but that's our job as modern people today.
Okay, Philip, before we open up to open discussion and debate, last time you were here, you announced your conversion to theism, to a sort of non-standard view of God. Mm-hmm. You still on that page now?
Sort of. Well,
don't throw me another curveball every time you come in.
Well, I'd like to start by sharing a recent experience that has deeply impacted me, if I may. So recently in very controlled circumstances, under the supervision of a fully professional therapist, I self-administered a very powerful psychedelic known as 5-MeO-DMT, which is a form of toad venom. And the result was, I believe, was that I was instantly and entirely annihilated. Philip Goff was wiped out of existence, and all that remained was the indescribable raging storm of consciousness underlying all things. And it was fucking terrifying. It really was. And I mean, honestly, I would encourage people not to do this, because I'm serious. It is, I think it's psychologically dangerous. I'm not going to be doing it again in a hurry. But I think it's one of the most important experiences I've ever had, and I believe it gave me direct insight into the ultimate nature of reality. So people who tend to be open to psychedelic experiences tend to go for Eastern religion, maybe Advaita Vedanta or Buddhism. So you might think, I'm going to be on Jessica's team. The problem is, I'm also very much persuaded by certain traditional arguments for God's existence, the kind like Bill likes, arguments rooted in the need to explain why the universe exists, why it's fine-tuned for life. You might think then I'm going to be on Bill's team. The problem is, though, I'm also completely persuaded by the most discussed argument against God's existence, rooted in the need to explain why there's so much suffering in the world. And I don't think the kinds of explanations traditional Christians like Bill give are very satisfying. I also don't think, by the way, the kinds of answers Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism give to why does the universe exist, why is it fine-tuned for life, insofar as they give answers at all, are very satisfying either. And of course, I'm not on Joe's team because I agree with these guys too much. So my problem is I think my three co-panelists are all completely right and completely wrong. And what I've been struggling to do in recent times is to shape a philosophical worldview that can do three things. One, that can accommodate this pure consciousness underlying all things that was witnessed in my experience. Two, that can explain why the universe exists and why it's fine-tuned for life. And three, that can explain why there's so much suffering in the world. So just a little task. But I think I've done it. I think I've worked it out. And to be clear, I'm not starting a cult. I don't think I'd be a very good cult leader, because I like people disagreeing with me too much. But I have found, since we last spoke, Jack, I have found, like to surprise you, I have found my spiritual home combining the mysticism of Eastern Christianity with the liberal flexibility of the Anglican Church. So I think the philosophy of the Eastern Orthodox Church provides a really good framework, both for making sense of mystical experiences, but also for explaining why the universe exists, why it's fine-tuned for life. But in terms of my own religious practice, I'm an Anglican because I want to be in a church that has women priests, a woman leader now, that welcomes LGBT-affirming Christians, and where in practice you can be a bit free-thinking, a bit heretical. I'm not going to get kicked out for believing God's not all-powerful, which I think is the only solution to the problem of evil. I think God's made the best universe they can. So I've ended up in a place which has given me not only the philosophical answers, but it's also given me a community, a spiritual practice, a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. And consequently, I've just become really passionate about trying to persuade spiritual but not religious people of the life benefits of being religious, of connecting your spiritual life to a community. And I know people have all sorts of worries about religion, and I sympathize with many of them, but I've discovered there's a way of doing religion that is liberal, scientifically credible, mystical. It's not a place I expected to end up, but it's made me very happy. And so I just want to encourage other people, let's give it a go.
Before I bring Bill back in, because there's a lot he'll disagree with which has been said on this side of the panel. Philip, In your book, Why, which came out a couple of years ago, you defend, amongst many hypotheses, this limited God you speak about. The God of traditional theism, just limited in power, so you can explain away the evil that exists in the world. But typically in religious experiences, people don't go, I've had this religious experience, and what was revealed to me was this God of limited powers. So can I ask just a clarification question? When you had this drug-induced experience, well, two questions really. One, why not just say, I was on drugs, I shouldn't take this spiritual hypothesis seriously? And two, was it did God speak to you like a God of limited powers and say, hey, I'm here, I can't do everything, by the way. Good luck converting people.
No, So what I like about the Eastern Church is that you have two aspects to God. They distinguish God's essence and God's energy is what they call it. So God's essence is God's core identity, which is completely unknowable, completely inaccessible, completely other. God's energies is God as an active living force that's immanent and accessible. I think it's something a bit like Brahman in Advaita Vedanta. So I feel I need both. If I was just focusing on my toad venom experience, I just need God's energies. Maybe I'd go for Brahman, I'd be Advaita Vedanta.
Right.
But if you're just starting with Brahman, if that's the foundational thing, this pure, infinite, timeless consciousness, I don't understand why, how do you get out of that suffering or delusion or differentiation? I think if you're starting with Brahman, pure consciousness, you're going to end with pure consciousness. So I explain my experience in terms of God's energies, but in terms of God's essence, I would locate purpose, goal-directedness, in terms of which we can explain why the universe exists, why it's fine-tuned for life. So you need both. Do you want the drug thing?
No,
Were you asking?
I'm not sure what you mean by that, but what the
I haven't
experience
got it.
entailed?
No, you said.
I want to know what the experience was, like what happened, like
You
what
said
did you see? What did it feel like?
if it's a drug, it's why not think
Oh,
it's just confusion?
it's typically considered like a defeater, right? If you can explain it by physical causes, processes, you don't need to posit the object of the religious experience.
Did you actually say that, or did I imagine it?
Oh,
Anyway, yeah. So I mean, a lot of people say that, but it depends what the drug is doing, right? And neurophysiologically, I talked to Christoph Koch about this. He's had a similar experience. Neurophysiologically, what it looks like it's doing is suppressing, stopping neural activity, not creating new neural activity like you imagine in a hallucination. I mean, very, very quickly. I mean, here's a metaphor that seemed to me to capture my experience. Imagine my mind is a light bulb wrapped in cotton wool. And so the cotton wool is like what's particular to me, Philip Goff, and the light bulb is this pure consciousness. It felt like the pure consciousness was just being ripped off, and then this light bulb of pure consciousness shone through. And that does fit with what we're seeing neurophysiologically. So I don't think it is a defeater, oh, you took a drug.
Okay, Bill, let's get you back in, particularly on Joe's reflections on meaning within the atheistic worldview. But second of all, you recently described Philip's view as, quote, wild speculations and philosophically, scientifically, and historically untenable. I wondered if he's changed your mind by taking drugs and talking about his experience.
Well, to speak to Philip's situation first, those remarks were about quite other issues than the ones that Philip has discussed tonight. My reservations, Philip, about what you've said tonight is that once one starts appealing to these sorts of mystical experiences to justify your worldview, it seems to me that you've lost all controls on objectivity and on truth. I too could claim what you would probably call a mystical experience, namely at the age of 16, after 6 months of the most intense soul searching I've ever been through, I was spiritually born again by placing my faith in Jesus Christ as my Savior and Lord. And it dramatically revolutionized my life. I came to know God in a personal way that completely turned my life upside down. It's never been the same since that evening over 50 years ago. And millions and millions of Christians throughout the world have had a similar experience of spiritual rebirth and coming to know God through faith in Christ. Why isn't that experience the valid sort of mystical experience of God? The control on that experience is that we have good historical reasons to think that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead, was who he claimed to be, this absolute revelation of God, and therefore is accessible to us spiritually if we turn to him in faith. So you have a nice combination of objective controls on the spiritual inner experience. And without those controls, I become just really suspicious that what may be going on might be self-deception. Now, as for what Joe had to say that you asked about, it seemed to me, if I understood you right, that his focus was on finding subjective meaning in life primarily. And as I said, I wouldn't think to deny such a thing. I think all of us can make up some meaning for our lives. I can make it the purpose of my life to become a medical doctor and serve the poor and the indigent. Or alternatively, I could make it the purpose of my life to found a pleasure island where I would make young girls available to paying customers. And the distinction between the two is wholly arbitrary because it makes no difference what you do, what you choose, what you believe. Everything winds up the same. And so I'm talking about meaning in an objective sense, not a subjective sense. Is there an objective meaning to human existence? And it seems to me to have an objective meaning, we need this external, transcendent reality, God, to tell us what the objective meaning in life is. And I would say that the meaning of life is to glorify God and to know and to enjoy him forever.
Jessica's comment, and then we'll go to responses.
Just to, I mean, I like your idea that we've got some historical verifications and so on, but that's a messy, messy argument. There's so many, there are people who had extraordinary experiences of mystical experiences. There are people who think the Bible's exactly right. There are people who don't and think it's a different text. So that's a kind of a hard place to go. I think that and the idea that we need God, we need to connect to God to validate the values we find in life is also messy. And you read your Dostoevsky and he says, look, if God, the Euthyphro dilemma, if God says, you know what, I really want you to do is to kick puppies and just keep kicking them. And if you do it really well, you'll get to heaven. Your job is to say, that's stupid. I'm afraid even though you're God and you created me, I'm not going to do that. I have access to higher values. And in a weird way, that's what Ridley Scott's doing in this very silly Alien movie series. When it's not Alien running around eating people, he's playing with the idea that humans were created or beings were created by some other beings for a fairly arbitrary reason. Just because you're created for something doesn't mean you have to value it. In the end, we still have to do the valuing. That is what we give our lives to. So there's an issue of personal assent. And just that takes us back to your point about religious experience, I think is an interesting and difficult one, right? Your experience, the most important things in your life. But if you can't use an experience that isn't generalizable as a public piece of evidence to decide your life, you're going to have to do a lot of empirical stuff, very, very important. But I'm not sure that works. You're never going to be able to figure out where your values lie if you have to do some sort of democratic test to see what everyone agrees on. And that is going to change era by era and time by time. So part of me wants to lean into these experiences. That's what a lot of people, maybe that reality has parts like that. I'm not saying, but maybe so. So not to throw them out, as it were.
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the point about objective and subjective meaning, I think, is very interesting. Because actually, one of the strengths, I think, when I reflect upon meaning under theism, isn't so much that it's subjective; it's that it marries up the subjective and objective components, right? So, I think about this with morality as well. It's one of the things I've gone back and forth on regarding the moral argument for God's existence. One of the things that God does, both in the realm of meaning and in the realm of morality, is kind of create a harmony between God's will and your will, right? So let's contrast it with something like Platonism, right? One of the reasons why I think that when we talk about meaning, I think this kind of objective-subjective distinction probably could get a bit blurrier, is because, say, Plato appeared to me one day somehow and demonstrated to me that there was a form of the meaning to correspond to his form of the good. And he demonstrated to me by a series of logical steps that this meaning existed, out there in the realm of the forms. Well, then it's kind of perfectly, it doesn't seem at all insensible to us for me to then turn around and say, well, I just don't care. What is this logically provable meaning of the form of the meaning? Like, who cares? I think one of the things that God does do philosophically, it's quite a crude job, but I think it's a very kind of cool job, is marry up the kind of transcendent aspect of meaning, whereby, which still wouldn't be stance independent, right? 'Cause it's just stance dependent on God's stance. And what is prudentially the best thing for you to do, because the person who's given you your telos is also holding the carrot and the stick. I think that's the kind of thing, that one of the interesting aspects of theism, and potentially an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on your perspective, but I think something to reflect upon about a kind of the thing that theism does isn't I think give us a kind of stance-independent meaning. It's giving us a stance-dependent meaning that's very, very persuasive because of punishment and reward. Like, if God exists, it's definitely in my best interests to follow him, right? Because there's this a very kind of fascinating and quite disturbing thinker called Joseph de Maistre from he's a kind of really quite reactionary guy, responding, I think, traumatized by and also responding to the French Revolution. And there's this kind of turn of phrase he sometimes uses, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's like, there's no other party. Like, you can't get out of the God realm if God exists, so you better play ball. And sometimes when I talk with Christians about this argument, because I don't think that's a bad argument. I think it's one of the reasons why I think actually the important theistic question sounds very obvious, but I think the important theistic question is whether God exists, not necessarily. So it's one of the other reasons why I think some of the problems that trouble Philip, like the problem of evil, don't trouble me so much, because again, if God exists, like, you got no choice, man. Like, you better play ball or else face the eternal consequences for not playing ball. So to bring this back to objective and subjective meaning, I actually think that God, the interesting thing that God does in a philosophical framework regarding meaning isn't necessarily to provide like stance-independent objective meaning, because Plato could do that. And I think that God is in a theistic worldview in many ways looks very, very different from a Platonistic worldview. I think the thing that God seems to do is marry up your own prudential judgments of what you ought to do, what's in your best interest to do, and this very much stance dependence, but magnificently broad stance of God.
What do you think, though, Joe, especially in response to this objection? So if there's no God, it's arbitrary whether you count blades of grass on your lawn or become a doctor. Do you concede that it's arbitrary what meaning you create in a godless world? Or do you think there's like purpose there embedded naturally in some way?
I think that it depends what you mean by arbitrary. It's clearly not arbitrary in the sense that you can't choose to find anything meaningful, right? There are, like, I don't have a choice, even if, so let's take like a radically extreme subjectivist position on meaning, just for the sake of argument, and so that everyone can create their own meaning. Well, there are still like broad limitations on what you can create. We can think about this to kind of tie God back in. We think about this, if there was a God who didn't have any kind of prudential levers to pull, so no rewards and no punishments, but told you that you were created in order to, calculate the 8 times table, like as far as you possibly could go. Well, there's a reason why we wouldn't necessarily find that motivating, and we also couldn't choose to find that motivating. I think that the arbitrariness here, I don't know, it's not arbitrary in the sense that it can like vary infinitely at all. I think there are, especially if you're a naturalist, then there are still going to be a limited number of things that humans can or most humans would be able to value. You might still have worries about that, right? Because you can still say there are unacceptable things within those limits. I think that the thing that I think God does there is provide a kind of punishment and reward, which I think is quite cool. I think it's an advantage of the view. Although it's an advantage of the view, I often find that when I talk to theists, they're less eager to accept. It seems a bit brute. It seems a bit like God as infinite jailer. But nonetheless, it is a job that theism does.
Yeah, we'll see if Bill is upset by that in a moment. But Philip, you had a rebuttal as well from Bill regarding your religious
Can I
experience.
just come back to a little bit surprised, Bill? You're skeptical of me believing on the basis of my mystical experience, because I've heard you distinguish between how you know your faith and how you show your faith. So I think you say you know your faith because of the inner witness of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
But you show it through these arguments, the resurrection, the fine-tuning, and so on. So, look, I mean, I think it's very difficult, but I think all knowledge is rooted in trusting experiences. I mean, this could be a delusion. I could be in the Matrix, you know? You can't get outside of your consciousness and check whether it's corresponding to reality. So what do? You just got to decide which experiences seem most evident. And anybody who's had the experience I had, you can read Michael Pollan, you can read Christoph Koch, you can listen to Joe Rogan, I don't know, anybody. It is more compelling than anything in ordinary experience, far more compelling. Also, with this particular substance, it is very uniform, perfectly uniform. There's nothing. There's no visuals. You're not meeting elves, or which is a bit disappointing. But you're not. There's nothing psychological. You're not going on narratives into your own. It is instant ego dissolution experience of this. Do you know what? Can I just say, I felt like we need to go, with this experience, I felt like we need to go back to the Old Testament talk of fear and trembling, of kind of awe and terror at beholding the divine. And I feel like maybe the psychedelic-friendly crowd, who I like, don't have that vocabulary. I read Michael Pollan, and he's like, what was this? No elves, or and it just, I felt like we need that awe, and it might have been a delusion. Anything might be a delusion. 2 + 2 might be 5. But if I'm going to trust this experience right now, just touch you to make sure you're there. I'm going to trust that experience I had because it was so much more compelling than anything in ordinary consciousness.
I don't like what these drugs are doing to me. It's touching me a lot.
Getting friendly.
Philip,
Go on, Bill.
these properly basic beliefs that you're talking about,
Yeah.
like belief in the reality, the external world around us, or the reality of the past and so forth, these all have cognitive content to them.
Yeah.
Similarly, the experience of the witness of the Holy Spirit has cognitive content to it, as does an experience of Jesus Christ as one's Savior and Redeemer. And maybe I'm being misled by your use of the word mystical, but when you use that word, to my mind, that means it doesn't have cognitive content. It's an experience without cognitive content to it, and that makes me really uneasy.
I think I want to defend, actually, it does have propositional content. I mean, you're not entertaining a proposition in the moment, but afterwards, I think it does have propositional content, but it's just a completely unstructured proposition. So there's no subject predicate structure, there's no things. This is something completely beyond space, beyond time, beyond any differentiation between I and other, this and that. You can only say sort of negative things about it. But I think it had content. I think it has content. It's just, like Louis Armstrong famously said about jazz, if you have to ask, you'll never know. You have to experience it.
Let's get Joe in.
To get to grasp the content.
I'm not sure. I suppose maybe this is my own myopia taking over me. I'm not quite sure what cognitive content means if it's unstructured. Like, surely I kind of don't know. I suppose I don't quite know what like an unstructured cognitive content looks like. It seems like the cool thing and the useful thing about cognitive content is that we can put it in structures, and thus it can enter the kind of public arena of discourse. I'm not necessarily saying those are the same thing, but it seems like cognitive content, at least as far as I can tell, would imply structure, although I may be wrong. The other thing I was going to say, on like basic beliefs. I suppose one difference that I do think emerges between certain forms of basic belief, or like I'd probably call it like a hinge proposition or something, things that I would normally associate with that, like belief in the external world, but also I would say like the principle of non-contradiction, is that one of the best justifications I can think of for holding to one of these is the inability to pragmatically live without it in the background of your assumptions. So the principle of non-contradiction, this is great because Aristotle basically gives this argument, which I think is very cool, early example of pragmatism. Sort of basically says, if you ask me why I believe in the principle of non-contradiction, he just kind of says, try thinking without it. You can't. And I think the external world does a very similar thing, right? Try acting without, at least at some level, thinking, okay, there's this thing that isn't me, and I'm pushing up against it. Like, it's not in my control. Even if it's mind-framed, it's not mind-controlled, to use Hasok Chang's distinction. I think these are two very good candidates for basic beliefs or hinge propositions, because if you try and live without them, at least entering into the background of your assumptions, you basically find it impossible to do anything. I think that one of the reasons why I'm hesitant to admit spiritual experiences into the background is that although it seems very veridical when you're in it, and I'm not denying that, it seems like it is in principle kind of possible for you, should you want, I know you don't, but should you want, to discard this experience and continue to live and navigate the world, you would be able to. And that's why I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm not sure how I feel about assigning these spiritual experiences explanatory bedrock. I was actually going to use the comparison of the predictable experiences of being intoxicated, but you put out a Substack article that I haven't read yet called The Mystical Experience of Drunkenness. So I don't know if you just say that is also a good example of
It was actually just a quote from William James.
Was it?
Well, a paragraph.
Jessica.
There's so much stuff going on in there. On the DMT thing, I haven't done it, but a lot of my friends have done it. I've been there and I agree it's extremely consistent. People come back and give very consistent, very clear accounts. They give accounts that are not kind of woo-woo, and they're, my dad was like, I want to do it, I want to see the elves. And we asked a friend, he was like, I didn't see elves, that I literally, my mind structures changed. And I was having an experience of being in a space, but without the normal structures, right?
Sorry.
That's all right. I'm not sure that means that there's no cognitive content, though. Like, a lot of people are like, okay, what I had an experience where there was qualia, and I was there, but it was not in any identifiable place. I didn't have normal structures of time. I didn't have normal structures of identity. Here's what it was like. So there was still a what it was likeness. So part of me wants to say, actually, I feel like you're speaking about something that a lot of people do speak about. Is it admissible as evidence? Well, it's odd. But then I wonder if that's necessarily bad. I mean, one of the messy things about dealing with not just the everyday world and not just the everyday range of concerns is you might have to speak to experiences that go beyond the usual, right? So the first time as a kid, I experienced what it was like when the plane dives and you feel weightlessness and you're like, oh, this is crazy. I never felt that in the same way before. It was a new experience. Didn't mean it was not a veridical experience. It didn't mean that it was somehow woo-woo. It was just one that not at that, I didn't know anyone else at that time. I was very young and people didn't fly as much. And it was like an unusual thing. It was a completely correct thing, right? So I think we have to be careful about deciding when experiences are no good for our kind of logical verificationist, logical positivist kind of thing. If there's stuff, there may be stuff that we need to go to unusual places experientially to be able to speak about, but that doesn't automatically mean that they're fabricated. And finally, I think your thing about the structures that aren't, I don't just choose it. We all know, and Plato knows, and everyone knows, and Indian philosophy knows, sometimes I'm just making up stuff. And sometimes I want to make up stuff, but I can't. I want to pretend that I'm happy, but I'm not. I want to pretend that this is a difference. I can fly, but I can't, right? So there's a sense in which we have experiences that, they may be mine, they may be subjective, but that doesn't mean that they're not in some sense real, that they don't represent real constraints and conditions of the world. So there's a bigger question about experience there.
You knocking that glass, Bill, reminded me of a book, because there's the consciousness book there, but you and Jessica very kindly contributed to a book edited a few years ago, Philosophers on God, at sale at the bookshop for a very modest £12. And you disagreed with Bill in the book, because at the beginning of the book, Bill says, if you adopt a Hindu worldview, it's nonsense because you need fundamentally something outside of time and space to bring the world into being. And in your chapter, you disagreed with Bill and said, no, ex deo makes sense. You can't get something from nothing. When the world was created, it must have been from something to begin with. You need some rudimentary stuff. And you haven't had that exchange
But this
outside of the
fits with
written
what
page.
Philip said, I think. I think there's a really good point, but at the same time, I think it's an example the Hindu side kind of wants to say, look, there's whatever creates the, I mean, I think Christianity says this too. There's whatever creates the world. If you're a Thomist, they're the powers in God, the concepts in God that unfold and generate. And then there's the parts of God which are under it. And if you're a physicist, there's the Big Bang and whatever it is that's generating space-time. And there's some condition of existence, in a sense, under or surrounding or supporting it, which is just radically different from this. So you're always going to have a bi-leveled account. Kabbalah is really good at this. They're really interested in all the powers by which the divine makes the world, but something underneath it we can't see or speak about and don't have the capacity for. So I think it's just helpful to remember that it's almost always like two levels from that side.
Well, how would you describe the difference, Bill, between your view perhaps and Jessica's then? If you both believe in some kind of creating force of the universe and something that holds the universe in being, then where do you find your disagreement between the traditional concept of God and Brahman?
Let me ask a couple of questions. Do you think that God is composed of matter?
No, I don't think most people do.
Right. So that would mean that God is ontologically distinct from the universe that he has made, right?
Is not logically distinct?
That he is
Sorry, that he's
ontologically
ontologically.
distinct, that there's a creator-creation distinction, since the creation is material in space and time, but the creator is an immaterial, spiritual, transcendent reality that has brought the physical world into being.
Well, that ontology is a messy area, because if you're just saying they all exist, then they all exist. If you want to say in which ways, which kinds of existence are in play,
Yes.
then clearly they'd be different.
Yes.
And that's important in the case, I think it's hugely important in the case of God, although we be careful about it, because I mean, your body and your mind and a story are of different ontological kinds. Something of one kind creating another ontological kind is not such a big deal in a way.
So in this case, we would want to say, I think, that God is what you've called a self-natured being. What I would say is a being that exists by a necessity of his own nature, a metaphysically necessary being, whereas the material universe and all that is in it are contingent beings. And it seems to me that that allows us to say that both God and the universe exist in a univocal sense, but that one exists necessarily and the other contingently. And, oh good, I see a thumbs up.
I'm with you.
So
I like
that's not
Yeah,
creation de Deo, which
Ex
means
Deo.
out of God. It's creation by God.
Well, emanationism gets given lots of different ontological sort of playouts, right? I mean, even Aquinas will say creation ex nihilo never means that God creates the world and then he's like, that was great, I'm going away. Oh, I'm tired. Oh, I'm dead. But the universe is still there, right? In fact, that was a heresy. That would be deism. The universe, all that the divine creates is always sustained, is the language he'd use, constantly grounded in the divine. It can't exist without it. There's a constant ontological making, right? It's contingent on that, yeah. And
Aquinas did believe that there was a creation event at some point in the finite past on the basis of Scripture. He didn't accept the Kalam cosmological argument for the finitude of the past that Muslim thinkers were propounding, but he believed in the creation event nevertheless. He thought that there's a state in the actual world of God existing alone without a material universe. And then God created ex nihilo in the sense that he created the universe but did not create it out of anything.
But remember, God is outside time. So
God is outside time.
He's outside. So it's not that there was like, I was alone, I was kind of bored.
No, quite right.
Bang, there's the universe.
Quite right. Your time begins at the moment of creation for Aquinas.
Yeah. Yeah, for us it does.
So it seems to me that
They're not miles apart at all.
is
No.
unproblematic.
Yeah, Philip first, and then Joe, eager to get your thoughts on some of these arguments for the existence of God in a moment. Because I know I think at one point you were religious and you've recanted your faith, maybe.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I was quite young, so I don't know. Nobody wants to hear about my spiritual journey.
No, we certainly do. Let's have Philip first, and perhaps the motivation for your theism outside of the mystical experience before we go to Joe too.
Yeah, I guess Bill is wanting to emphasize a sort of distinction between God and the universe. And then the other extreme of that would be pantheism, where God just is the universe. I think where I've ended up is a sort of overlap view, where think of a Venn diagram, where you've got the bit of God that's wholly other, that's completely separate from the universe, the bit of the universe or the nature of the universe, which is wholly separate to God, and then the bit in the middle, like a Venn diagram, So I think this, sorry, I don't want to keep going back to this pure consciousness I experienced, I think was timeless, spaceless, uncreated, but where I part company with Advaita Vedanta, for example, I don't think that's the whole of God, right? So this pure consciousness is the bit where God and the universe fit together. So that's the only way I can make sense of, I encountered something I believe that was at the core of my being and that was uncreated. Either I am God, I mean, not just me, I'm not starting a cult, like each of us just is God, or there's some sort of overlap. But just finally, we find this in Christian thinkers like Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian thinker, who said the ground of the soul is the ground of God, this most foundational part of us. He got in a little bit of trouble with the Pope for that. But anyway.
Yeah, let's remember, Philip, what Joe said about the law of contradiction. If one circle of the Venn diagram represents everything that is timeless, immaterial, spaceless, necessarily existent, and the other circle represents everything that is temporal, material, contingent, then they cannot overlap. Those are self-contradictory, so the area of overlap is a contradiction.
I like it, I see what you're saying. I guess I would say I wouldn't define the physical universe as essentially contingent then. I think most of it is, but I think there's something at the core of the universe, there's something at the core of you, Bill, and at the core of me that is necessary, timeless, uncreated, and that's where the overlap is. So a lot of the universe is contingent, but there's something at its core, this light bulb that the cotton wool is wrapped around. So
you'd be quite anti Eckhart. You'd be like, okay, don't get too grounded in God.
Oh yeah, I would be. I'm not very sympathetic to these mystical.
Because you haven't had the experience, man.
Well, how do you know, Philip, that your mystical experience was not an experience of the Orthodox God? How do you know that it was this indescribable, self-contradictory, strange God that, especially since there doesn't seem to be any cognitive content to differentiate it? Maybe you had an experience of the Orthodox God.
Because it was something at the core of my being that belongs to nobody. It's something at the core of my being where there is no distinction between I and you or this and that. Something timeless and uncreated. So
He's not impressed.
Yeah, that's
shaking
just
his head.
nonsense.
why? That's not nonsense. Why is it
There's
nonsense?
no
There's no
distinction between
contradiction
you
in what
and
I just said.
I suppose I feel, sorry, maybe it's just I'm feeling a little bit lost.
I'm an analytic philosopher. I would defend there's no contradiction in what I just said.
Let Joe jump in. Then we'll see.
I mean, I don't think what you say is like necessarily contradictory. I don't think we need to call a Graham priest, so to speak. But there'll be like 2 people who get that joke. But Graham priest is brilliant. Anyway, but one thing that I think I'm struggling to follow is like, let's take many of Dr. Craig's arguments, right, or something, my kind of rudimentary understanding of something like the Kalam cosmological argument. There's a sort of like 2-step process. There's an attempt to use principles that are considered to be justified in order to trace something, in the Kalam case, trace something back to the beginning of the universe and infer something about. And I think this is probably one of the most important parts of the argument.
Just remind us of the argument as well. And
Oh, sorry. So, I'm going to butcher it.
I know,
This
in
feels,
front of
this feels a
Dr.
little bit
Craig
like
as
singing
well.
in front of Pavarotti or something. But but as I understand it, to give a kind of toy version, it would be that everything that begins to exist has a cause. There cannot be like an infinite chain of causes. So, and thus the universe has begun to exist. Thus the universe has a cause, and then through the second stage we establish that cause has various properties, and it begins to look like God, timeless, spaceless, etc., etc., etc. Now, I can talk about some of the areas where my agnosticism is maintained, because I kind of struggle to supplant observations and reasons that we have kind of in universe, in particular situations in the world of middle-sized objects, is sometimes called, and transplanting them outside. But that's kind of besides the point. My point is that I can kind of there's a kind of structure there where it's like you've got a principle, you infer something from it, and then you infer something about the properties of God from the features of this argument. I think that's quite compelling. At the very least, I can kind of follow it. I suppose I can't see a similar structure from kind of, you have this religious experience. What are the bases on which you're making inferences about a particular conception of God from the contents of that experience? Or is it just a kind of ineffable kind of, I don't know, direct apprehension in your view?
It was part of the content of the experience that there was, I want to say realm of reality. Realm sounds a bit hippie, doesn't it? Anyway, a realm of reality where any kind of differentiation has no meaning. Concepts of differentiation don't apply. So that's the sense in which I wasn't there, or I was everywhere, depending on how you want to look at it. So that's just part of the content of the directly known experience, that there was no differentiation. And in that sense, Philip Goff, something particular didn't exist, but there was reality. So there is this. So if the experience was not a hallucination, there is a deeper realm of reality where there is no differentiation at all.
Okay,
so if I'm
brief fire, and then we'll get Jessica back in.
So in terms of like the kind of argumentative structure here, it's kind of like the experience is datum, and then there are various inferences being drawn from that. So it's effectively like an empirical argument.
I mean, how do you know your pain exists? How do you know 2 + 2 is 4? We have to just start with what seems most evident and build up our worldview from there. We have no choice.
You've got more disapproving faces on this side. Let's go over here. Jessica.
I'm not even sure I actually agree. I don't even really have the same worldview, but in a way I'm defending Philip's position insofar as for those who are kind of sort of idealists, and panpsychism and cosmopsychism aren't quite idealism, but in a way they want to say, look, there's a consciousness fundamental fabric, and indeed in our everyday consciousness, though we don't realize it, in some ways we're tapping into a fundamental fabric. This is an expression, a manifestation, a epiphenomenon of that fundamental fabric that we're experiencing. So this is evidence we're getting right now, but we're just not able to get it in its fullest range of evidence, and we're also just a bit confused about how to interpret it. So in a way, for those who feel that DMT is a really useful thing, they'll say, look, what DMT is doing is it's blocking some of the inhibiting factors on my perception.
Yeah.
Right? What was happening before was I kept perceiving the red apple, but I was colorblind, and now it's like turned on my color sensors, or I was just interpreting it the wrong way, and now it's like blocked off some of the interpretative factors which were stopping me from seeing what's really there, right? So within the worldview that you're taking, the kind of experience you had is actually an extremely rational way of getting information about the fundamental fabric of reality. If you don't hold that worldview, you won't necessarily go along with it. But in a way, I think that sort of attacking it, because it just makes no sense as new cognitive evidence, it's precisely almost like a Berkeleyan, classic idealist, Fichtean idea that if you've got conscious there at the beginning, you need to stop focusing on the carpet and the sound of me and the individual stuff, so you can see it's almost like a transcendental argument, see what's the fundamental prerequisite that's happening there all the time, and DMT does that.
Bill, when you were describing Philip's concept of God, you used some words like self-contradictory and some other
Yes,
phrases
well,
like this.
I wanted to ask Philip, what about, you described this experience of non-differentiation, where there were no distinctions. What about moral distinctions. I find one of the most heinous aspects of Hinduism to be the claim that
Little
the
drive-by there.
distinctions between, sorry, Jessica, the distinction between good and evil is part of Maya. It's illusory.
They don't think that.
That ultimate reality is one, it is beyond the distinction between good and evil. And that seems to me to be completely unconscionable. So surely you do want to affirm that there are moral distinctions that mustn't be overridden.
That's a good question. I suppose I'm happy to say this thing, it's not a thing, but it is wonderful. It's terrifying or awe-inspiring, yes, of great value. So yeah, I was saying like there's nothing positive can be said about it because it was so other, but hey, I'm happy. I guess I'm happy to say it's of great value.
Jessica, on that remark there, I've heard you say once that there is no obligation to create good karma. That if you wanted to, if you had some other goal in life, say you wanted to become like, I don't know, like a pop star or something like this, so you could spend your whole life dedicated to that, screw over everyone you love and care about because you want to focus. I think you did.
But no. But
something like, but you said if you could value something else, and there's no obligation to create the good karma. You could find some other end you want to pursue instead. So there's not an obligation in the same way that Bill thinks.
There's a confusion here in terms of like where moral structures lie, right? Hinduism says there are moral structures. If you're in the world and you're a consciousness and you're interacting with other consciousness, you have moral responsibilities. And since you are, and I am, and we all are here, we have those responsibilities, right? So that's not the issue. Hinduism is extremely invested in understanding what's called dharma, the structure of how the world around us works. And if you're in a world with moral fabric to it, you've got to follow that moral fabric. The thing about you can choose what to do with your life, and God's not going to punish. Well, it's, in a sense, God's not going to. God's not going, oh God, you did the wrong thing. Slap, slap, slap. It's more about your own choice. That's about your own karma. Right? If I decide, you know what, I've had people say to me, yeah, I've been reading the Bhagavad Gita, I ought to achieve the highest liberation, but actually I think I'll stay in this world a while. I'm not ready for that. There are other things I want to do. That's up to you. Right? God's not going to punish you for that. There will be bad repercussions, and more than even than punishment, it's simply wrong to be cruel. Yeah. It gets that. That's not a question. Yeah. And so that would be a misrepresentation of the tradition.
So you say there are objective moral values?
There's definitely objective moral values, and they're to do with what it is to be a consciousness in a world where pain, there's a great argument that came up with Peter Singer last time I was here, where they say, look, if you understand what pain is, you know it's the kind of thing that should be prevented. It's by its very nature the thing that oughtn't to exist. And the same in reverse could be said for pleasure. So that's not so much a problem. It's more that God's not, they are quite clear with a number of Sufis and Christians that we shouldn't be doing good because we're scared of being punished. That's not real morality.
Okay, we're about 10 minutes before opening up to audience questions. So if you've got points of discussion and debate that you want to bring up now, then please do so. But Joe, we've got 3 theists on the panel. We're talking about objective moral values, so you know I'm coming to you with that. Your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I think that the mere objectivity, similar to my point about meaning earlier, I think that mere objectivity of value seems to not. It almost seems like that's kind of underselling the strength of theism here. Just in a sense, I think that merely the platonic good. It's not that it kind of doesn't do anything. It just seems a little bit toothless, right? I think that the advantage of theism isn't necessarily in the mere objectivity of values. It's in the presence of an enforcer of values. That doesn't have anything to do with objectivity at all. That is just a very, very powerful one stance, keeping all of our other stances in line. I don't know. I'm not really sure what exactly objectivity seems to do there. I think that actually the strength of theistic morality lies elsewhere. I think that's one reason why a theist might prefer it to Plato's morality. I think my own skepticism about stance-independent moral values is partly because I don't really know how to make sense of like one ought to do something, and yet there's no will or person kind of oughting them. It's just an ought floating out there in the ether. I suppose it's just the standard problem of normativity stuff, and I think God solves that in a way that I think Platonism doesn't. But I don't think like mere objectivity does that much in this kind of disconnected, something just is in and of itself wrong kind of way. Like, it then seems open for somebody to be able to say, I get that it's subjectively wrong, but I don't care. And that seems very, very odd, right? Like, in the Platonist world, it seems like somebody can say, I think that's wrong, but like, what does wrongness have to do with me? I think the advantage of theism is that it links up these two things, right? Your prudence and your virtue are now aligned in a way that I think is quite neat. That's one of the reasons why I think one of the coolest things about theism, or one of the most important things about theism, is the agential nature of God, right? It's because then it's not. I don't think the stance independence is the relevant property here that theism is getting at. It is the power of this one moral stance that has just merely the force to override all others.
Bill, do you want to come in here then?
I think, Joe, you've put your finger on one of the most important advantages of divine command, morality. Namely, objectivity is not enough by itself to have objective moral values. We need some sort of oughtness. I ought to do this, I ought not to do that. This is a matter of moral duties. And here, I think theism provides a grounding for that moral oughtness, in that moral duties arise from imperatives issued by a qualified authority. And God, as the paradigmatic good, is qualified to issue such moral commands to us, so that moral values are rooted in the very nature of God, and our moral duties are rooted in the divine commands, which are a reflection of his nature. And so you get both the objectivity of the values along with this oughtness that is very difficult to ground on any other sort of theory, even Platonism and other moral realisms. It's hard to get that oughtness. So this is a really important point that I think you've hit upon.
I think that in some ways, though, we might think it's a cool point for different reasons. Like, for me, it's less about the morality of God and more about just the fact that the mere existence and power of God means that what is prudent for you to do, and thus what is, like, it kind of makes a good reason for you to have an internal ought to do something right, like whatever your position. It's like God is the thing that can make the psychopath behave morally. Which that's an advantage, right? It's an advantage, but that's why I'm not quite sure how to make sense, or I'm not quite sure what the import is of objectivity apart from this force that also ensures that this objective moral fact is also like prudent for you to follow. Yeah. I think in some ways this is like the reason you can say that
this is huge again, because what happens when your moral duty contradicts what prudence tells you to do? Self-interest. Self-interest and morality often come head in head into conflict. Theism provides a basis for doing your moral duty even at the expense of self-interest, and therefore following your moral obligations over your prudential interests. So that's just one more practical argument in support of a theistic perspective.
Well, yeah,
Can I try and defend objectivity without divine command? I mean, it all went wrong with David Hume. He bloody messed everything up.
David Hume.
David Hume. So David Hume has this idea that all life goals are on a par. Reason is the slave of the passions. You just got your life goals. That's what you're doing, and then reason just serves them. I just think that can't be true. I mean, I don't know, you pick silly examples. Imagine someone whose fundamental life goal is counting blades of grass, and they don't enjoy it. They get no pleasure from it. That's just their fundamental life goal. And they sweat and toil and they cheat and kill just to count as many blades of grass as they possibly can. Not for some other reason. That's just their fundamental. If you're a Humean, you should say, oh, that's just the same as... That's bullshit. That is a pointless, stupid way to live if you as opposed to scientific advancement or curing cancer or just having a nice, pleasurable life. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, yeah, but of course you're making that from a particular stance, right? It's not that the object...
From a particular standpoint.
Well,
I'm
as in,
just
like,
saying that, I'm saying that seems evidently true to me. What does that add to
But that's
say?
what I mean, as in it's a...
No, I think that's subjective. I think that's subjective, like 2 + 2 is 4.
Joe, with his response.
I'm not entirely sure.
Getting a bit
I'm
carried
not
away.
entirely sure what the reasoning for it being objective would be. And secondly, like, I'm not really sure what the inference from mere objectivity here would be. I get the inference from the theist kind of objectivity, because you've got this whole kind of, like, straightforwardly enforcement framework for the set of objective values. But, like, what I don't know, like, what it seems like what the only advantage here is for you to be able to say, I think that this is a waste of life. But you can say that anyway. Like, no, you know, moral subjectivist is going to come out the cupboard and stop you.
All you can do in philosophy is start from what seems most evident. And the fact that dedicating your life to counting blades of grass when you don't get any pleasure from it is meaningless and stupid, that seems to me as evident as 2 + 2 is 4.
First of all, I mean, I maybe would push back a little bit on the coherence of somebody having a, you know, like a goal of their life that there is no emotional fulfillment in. Like, I don't really know if that follows the kind of reason as a slave of the passions.
You've been talking to Alex O'Connor.
I don't but I'm just not sure. Like, I'm not sure what I can infer from the mere existence of these objective moral facts, like, out there in the ether. Like, I get that, you know, I get you could, if they are there, how exactly does that change someone's life? Whereas with God, like, at the very least, it seems like, on the face of it, incredibly obvious how the existence of God would change the way that you deliberate. But say tomorrow I found out, you know, through inexorable deontic logic, that my duty was to count grass. You know, that was actually the objectively moral way to live. I think I still wouldn't do it. I'd just think, like, oh, screw it, man. Like, I'm not going to sit around counting grass all day.
But if God said to you,
Well, yeah, it's more.
It is your fundamental nature to count his blessings.
Well,
Oh my God! Thank God, I've got a proper authority.
But it's not necessarily. But I think that's where Dr. Craig and I differ. Like, I don't think it's because of a proper authority. I think there would be because, you know, if God's like if God says that's your telos and, like, there's no afterlife, then yeah, I'd probably be like, oh well, I'm just not going to do that. But if God's like, you have to do this, and if not, I'm going to send you to hell. Well, that's a pretty good prudential reason.
The cosmic gangster. You need a cosmic gangster.
This is just like not only atheist and existentialists, but good Christian existentialists, from Kierkegaard to Dostoevsky, have disagreed with this. And I get.
But I think that's.
But just to notice, it means that God is just another authority who, regardless of whether he's moral or not, is like got the power to decide for us what we ought to do, and we're going to defer to it. It's very like Nietzsche, I'm happy to be your slave, someone tell me what's good, making it easy for himself. It's also something that, for instance, in Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah, you get these thinkers who are really scared that someone's going to grab God's authority. It's okay, I found the text that says God really wants you to do this, and work through me. So there's a certain political, a human, a practical danger to this kind of like, I don't know, he's up there and whatever he says is innately good because he says it. There's a problem there. So what we're really talking about is the problem of where do you get the authority for your morality from?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
to be fair, that's the point. Whereas my point, because obviously I'm an agnostic. So, like, my point is that it seems clear to me what theism adds there.
But
the kind of mere existence of Platonic moral facts, I don't know, it just seems to add a lot less.
Well, why would it be? I mean, why would it be the case that God's saying it's really good to kill puppies versus Plato saying, oh, there's a form, the highest form turns up to be the form of killing puppies, or, you know, but then G.E. Moore comes in and says, look, I don't think this is going to work. You're going to have to look for that strange sense you have that is above your pleasure sense, which is your sense of what is innately good, even if it's not what you enjoy.
I'm going to have to hold on to my moral duty and make sure there's plenty of time for questions from the audience. We'll start off on this side.
Hi, guys. Thank you all very, very much. I'm Zach. I've got a question for kind of all the panelists, really. I want to know what you think about whether we, sort of as a species, has sort of moved on from the need to find objective meaning. I can understand if you're a 14th century peasant and you're so confused about the world around you and you feel you're so sort of restricted in your understanding, you might need to kind of seek something bigger than yourself. But I feel that confronted with things like the pale blue dot, and you see kind of how vast the cosmos is, armed now with our kind of new understanding about the universe and the world. Is it a bit like sort of, rejecting Santa? Do we sort of, have we sort of evolved and moved on from the need to kind of find objective meaning, and can we just be content with subjective meaning and like you said, Jessica, kind of just putting out, say, kindness in the world and being kind of content with that more immediate meaning?
Let's kick off with Joe. So a question from Zach: have we moved past the need for meaning?
I mean, if what you mean by objective is stance independent, then I kind of don't think that, I don't know how to make sense of like fully stance independent meaning, like meaning with a view from nowhere, with no valuing agent or set of instincts or affects, just like meaning out there in Plato's realm of the forms. Then I to be honest, I'm not sure how I'd ever spot that meaning or make sense of it. I'd say even in theism, it seems like you don't have stance independent meaning, you have God's stance as a way of like lending meaning, and then you kind of inherit God's stance. So I suppose it's like, I don't think that stance independent meaning was ever seemed to be the goal. I think that we quite often think of things like God's will in theism as stance independent, but it's a stance. Like it's not that, it's just a very important stance.
Jessica, you want to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, in some ways, I really like what you're saying, and I think we are in a time where that idea, like, but I feel that this is good, I love my child, but is it objective? There's something wrongly calibrated about the way that we've been taught to think through that problem. At the same time, obviously, we don't, people go, oh, well, then, today I fancy pie more than anything in the world. Tomorrow I want to save the world. Today I don't care and I want to count blades of grass. That kind of arbitrariness of taste and feeling isn't really necessarily what we want to end up sort of advocating for. But in a sense, I think I agree with something I think Joe's trying to get to, which is that we're underselling humans. We have arbitrary tastes, and we're constantly overriding them in ourselves because we see higher values. I want to sleep, but actually I do want to get up and teach my students. I don't want them to get in trouble. They got an exam tomorrow. I want to do that, but actually I do want to do something higher. We have senses in the same way that we are able to do maths, and we can get access to concepts and structures in the mind. That's kind of what Plato was talking about, right? I can access structures, and we tend to agree on them. I think there's more in the human mind than just random arbitrary taste, and tying into those things, you get a kind of beyond the objective, back to my subjective, but which is still actually part of a hierarchy of higher and higher values.
We had a question in the centre, was it? At summary top, great beard. That's him, yeah, 3 in. And then we'll have one from this side if anyone's got a question over here afterwards.
Thank you, everyone. My question is for Dr. Craig. Thank you for your contributions to Christian apologetics over the years. Just to preface my comments, and my question rather, I am a software engineer with an interest in philosophy. I was born again 2 years ago, and you've been a great part of my journey, although you don't know it. I've listened to over 2 years of your Defenders classes on YouTube. Thank you for putting those online. When we're talking about God, there seems to be this perception of him as as one person in this discussion. And I think a missing ingredient in this is understanding the nature of the second person, the Logos. One of the keys to unlocking my understanding of Christianity was knowing that the word translated in John 1:1 is the Logos, and the Logos is the first principle of all intelligibility and reason. I'm a Platonist. Previously, I was a Platonist, and it all was making sense to me, understanding that actually in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And it all makes sense when you understand the picture. I have this analogy in my head of the Father being the celestial sun, the body in the sky, the kind of raging fireball, and then the Son, the Logos, being the rays of light coming to us, the energy. They are one and the same. The sun didn't start. The rays of light started at the exact moment the fireball came into existence. And when we talk about the sun, we are talking about both the rays and the body. So, sorry.
Yeah, just the question here, yeah?
Yeah, the question is, and also just to on Joe's point, you can get to a very interesting argument for the objectivity of moral truths in Immanuel Kant's groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, and he argues that you can actually derive objective. Anyway, sorry. So my question is, Dr. Craig, do you feel we need to do a better job as Christian apologists differentiating actually the Father and the Son and the Spirit, who of course gives us non-propositional experiences that Philip is very keen on? Do you think that this is a key to unlocking the truth of the nature of reality?
I think you've articulated very well the fundamental rational nature of God himself in virtue of the Logos being with God and being God in the beginning. So yes, I resonate very much with that. I don't think that it's Christian apologists who need to emphasize this so much more as Christian theologians. I think a lot of the contemporary work on the Trinity is rather mushy, and we need to have more rigorous work on Trinitarian theology. The reason that wasn't discussed tonight, I think, was because our topic was mere theism that is common to Muslims, Christians, Jews, even deists. So that's why we didn't get into Trinitarian thought tonight.
Philip, a brief comment and then the question over here.
I think the Protestant Reformation didn't go far enough. So I don't understand, and this is actually where me and Bill agree, I think. I don't understand why so many Protestants feel they have to cling to Nicaea. Like, why think the guys 400 years after Jesus died got everything right? And, you know, I mean, why think the writers of the Bible got everything right? I'm inclined, like most scholars, to think some of the letters attributed to Paul were never really written by him. I'd be inclined to take them out. So I think, you know, why not use our best science, our best philosophy, our best biblical scholarship to try and penetrate to what we think occurred in the origins of Christianity? I think that's...
Now, he didn't appeal to Nicaea, Philip. He appealed to John, chapter 1, the prologue of the Gospel of John. So I think he did exactly
I guess I was riffing off the question rather than challenging them. We were talking about the Trinity. You know, I think it should be an option for a Christian to be a Unitarian, just on your own. I'm closer to Bill than that, but...
Joe,
on Kant, just very briefly, because actually I think you raise a very important point. I think that the important thing, at least one of the things, it could be I'm totally misreading Kant, one of the things that I take away from Kant's ethics is that, you know, morality is constitutive of agency. And that's very different from a kind of Platonic fact out there. I think that's what Korsgaard talks about this in the Sources of Normativity. You know, one of the potential advantages of a constitutive grounding for ethics is that there's not any gap between the moral fact and why you ought to do it, because it is constitutive of your agency. It is things you are already committed to in virtue of acting. I think that's why I think, you know, for example, you know, while Kant has an objectivity of values, it's quite a different kind of objectivity from the kind of Platonic form of the good. And I think it goes through agency in a way that I think makes it significantly more persuasive.
A question over here.
All right, this question is also for Dr. Craig. Like this gentleman over here, I'm a fellow Christian. I've been profoundly impacted in a positive way by your work, so thank you. The question is this, though. So I've struggled with doubt at the same time as being a Christian, so the question kind of reflects that. If paradoxes like Hilbert's Hotel only show that actual infinities are counterintuitive rather than impossible, and if the block universe view removes the need to traverse the past to reach the present, what do you think is the strongest reason to believe that an infinite past is metaphysically impossible rather than just unintuitive?
I disagree with that dichotomy that you make between some things being unintuitive and some things being metaphysically impossible. We have metaphysical intuitions that I think are reliable. For example, the metaphysical intuition that whatever has a shape has a size, or that this desk could not have been made of ice, or that the prime minister could not have been a prime number, or that there are necessary truths of logic and mathematics. All of these are based upon metaphysical intuitions. So if the idea of an actually infinite past is really metaphysically counterintuitive, I think that counts powerfully against it. You don't need to show a strict logical contradiction any more than you do in those metaphysically necessary truths that I mentioned a second ago. Moreover, I would never concede that the tenseless view of time is as plausible as a tensed view of time. I think that the reality of temporal becoming is more evident to us than the reality of the external world, because we sense temporal becoming in the inner life of the mind, the thoughts that succeed one another, as well as in the external world. So that's, I think, a quite hopeless defeater of the argument against the infinitude of the past, to try to appeal to this tenseless theory of time. And then finally, of course, you still got all the scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe to deal with. The astrophysical evidence based upon the expansion of the universe, and the thermodynamic evidence based upon the second law, both of which suggest that the universe is not past eternal. So there's really a very powerful cumulative case, I think, to be made for the truth of the fact that the universe began to exist.
Great.
Thank you.
We had a question from long hair with the fringe just there, maybe a fellow.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Philip Goff, for your incredibly personal and experiences. It's very, very nice to find someone so vulnerable on stage. Thank you so much. But my question is my favorite Christian apologist, Fo Jolly. So, in one of your videos, you referred to yourself as more broadly non-cognitivist about ethics. I wondered if...
Sorry, what was that?
You referred to yourself in one of your videos as an ethical non-cognitivist, or something along the lines of more broadly non-cognitivist about these matters. Perhaps I'm completely incorrect in that, but fair enough. I wondered, because I'm also a non-cognitivist as a consequence of my atheism, I'd be really interested in your particular argument for non-cognitivism, if you still hold that view.
To be honest, I'm less sold on non-cognitivism than I used to be. I think what I take from non-cognitivist views, like emotivism, but also like prescriptivism, isn't necessarily their like negative story of a moral proposition has no content. I don't see necessarily any reason to think that, but I also don't necessarily think that much hinges on it. The kind of obsession with like the semantic meaning of terms seems to me to be like a very interesting, but ultimately quite peculiarly like 20th century thing. As in, the thing that I'm sort of interested in is like, how do moral prescriptions function in our language and in our behavior? And I think that I still remain very convinced that emotion, and moreover, like not just emotion, but the will to negotiate a shared behavioral space is very important when we're trying to give an account, not just of morality, but of things like moral psychology. So that's kind of the underlying idea behind it. And also because I think that we underrate how important emotions are in not just our kind of our own values, but also in our praise of one another. I mean, like a really classic example of this is like, compare two people, one of whom feels very strongly that they really ought, they ought to help people, that's like, that falls out of their particular emotional constitution. And so they go out and they just feel compelled to do this. And they might take great joy in it, they might emotionally react in any number of ways, but it's like a kind of passionate, involved set of actions versus someone who sort of doesn't feel any of those emotions and sort of just goes through the motions of doing those same set of actions. Now, if you're like a diehard consequentialist, you might think these things are equivalent. Generally, when I pose this question, this is just anecdotal, people really want to praise the person who is emotionally compelled by their values are emotionally compulsive to them. And so I don't know, I think that my My non-cognitivism probably isn't the best word because I think that that's very bound up with a particular debate around like the semantics of moral propositions. I suppose what I really want to say is that I think that both emotions and the emotional thrust, for want of a more specific term, of moral behavior, moral beliefs, and moral kind of, I don't want to say propositions because it almost seems too abstract, like moral statements, like literally sayings, I think are a very important part of our analysis. And also that they're not like the bogeyman that people often think they are. Like letting emotion into your analysis of like moral, of both ethics and also moral psychology, just like it doesn't mean that you have to open the floodgates, right? You know, it's okay.
Right, try and fit in a couple more questions. We have an Alex O'Connor lookalike on the front row here, so we'll take a question from that gentleman.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I feel a bit greedy because I've spoken to you all before, but I have to defend Philip. I just have to. Yes. In two specific ways. Not quite. Philip talked about his experience, and I wanted to point out firstly that experience in opposition to reasonable argument is not unique to Philip Goff. And particularly for Dr. Craig, I want to know what you think, for example, of Thomas Aquinas, who, despite being a master of rational philosophy, near the end of his life, has a religious experience while performing the Eucharist, and then refuses to finish the Summa Theologica, writing to his friend that he can write no more because what he's seen, his work is like straw compared to what he's seen. I think he's more qualified than anybody to judge the worth of academic philosophy, and yet one experience was enough for him to say that that was nothing in comparison. Do you think that Thomas Aquinas should have known better, given that that experience had no cognitive content? And on that point of cognitive content, I think Philip's quite justified in saying that he can't put the experience into words. If everybody was blind and no one had seen anything, and suddenly I was able to see for a moment, and I saw that pink chair over there, and then I closed my eyes again, and I told you, I just had an experience that was so real, but so different from anything I've ever experienced. And you said, maybe it was hallucination, and I say, no, I really think that was true. And you say, did it have any cognitive content? Could you tell, what is this pinkness that you saw? I wouldn't be able to put it into words. I'd be literally incapable of explaining what it was. And I would say, I guess it doesn't have cognitive content in that sense, but it was real, and I experienced it. And I think that that would be legitimate. And I just wondered if you really think that all experiences of that kind are intrinsically like untrustworthy.
Well, I think that your illustration of a blind man suddenly seeing definitely does have cognitive content. He sees now that what he formerly felt were seat cushions and stairs are these actual objects, and now he visually perceives them. There's definite cognitive content to that visual experience. And I'm not sure what it is that Philip has really experienced in this mystical, non-differentiated mysticism where this and that are not distinct. I can't make sense of it. Now, I don't think anybody understands what happened to Thomas Aquinas that you mentioned and why he wouldn't finish his Summa after this religious experience he had. But I must say that I do think that Thomas's whole systematic theology was grossly misshapen by Aristotelianism and Aristotelian philosophy. And so in one sense, it was like straw. I think that I'm not a Thomist. And I think his theology in many cases is just terrible because of its Aristotelian physics and metaphysics. So although I'm not sympathetic with the viewpoint that Greek philosophy corrupted Christian theology, there is a good deal of truth that Aristotelianism and Neoplatonism had profound effects upon Christian theology, leading to doctrines like divine simplicity and impassibility and immutability that are quite unbiblical. So whatever prompted Thomas to do that, I would not say, well, it would have been better if he had continued on and finished his work.
All right, the little insight there. If those who are coming here in 4 days' time, you'll see Alex and Bill in extended conversation and debate. So we're looking forward to that, a bit of a window into that. I'm looking for I'm dancing the wokey-cokey and looking for someone that's not male or pale, just for a second here. Oh, there's a lady up here with an extended arm, hoping to God I haven't misgendered you. And maybe there's we can have 2 snappy questions, perhaps. We'll see how this one goes. And then if we've got time, I'll try and bring somebody else in.
Thank you. I'm Sonia, and I am she/her.
Nice one, Sonia. Thank you.
I just think the cognitive content thing might be a slight red herring, but what concerns me is I just can't see why Philip Goff's experiment isn't a classic brain in a vat / nose experience machine case. And it just seems to me that it doesn't really tell us anything about the real world. But I feel like I must have missed a stage in the argument because I don't think you would have laid out in such an obvious way. I do concede that I think the loss of individuality could be a very good thing. And in fact, I often conceive heaven might be a little bit like that. But I still can't get beyond this idea that nothing really follows from the experience with respect.
I suppose my point was that, look, the human epistemological situation is unfortunately very imperfect. How the hell do you know anything? If all we have direct access to is consciousness right here and now, trust my memory, but maybe that's deceiving me. What are you going to do? You've just got to, all you can do is start with what seems most evident. So if you're saying, well, what does it mean? Why believe it means anything beyond just the experience? Why don't you say that about your ordinary sensory experiences? Maybe why should I believe there really is a hand here? I could be just hallucinating. I could be in the Matrix. But we think it's okay. I mean, this was William James's point in his great book chapter on mysticism and the varieties of religious experience. We all think it's okay to just believe our sensory experiences. You couldn't do science if you didn't. We've got to do that to do science. Now you tell me, if it's okay for you and me to trust our ordinary sensory experiences, why is it not okay for me to trust my mystical experience? Not just that the experience happened, but what it seemed to be telling me about reality. That seems to be a double standard. What's the relevant difference? That it's okay to trust your senses, but it's not okay to trust mystical experience. Why? What's that? Sorry, getting carried on.
No, I just wanted to get. I thought that would be a subtle.
I think it's just occurred to me that I think that we've all been talking at kind of cross purposes. I think that I think the distinction here might be that we have been conflating whether you can trust your mystical experience and whether it is evidence for a third party to trust your testimony of your mystical experience. Okay, maybe we weren't talking across purposes.
I mean, is it evidence for Philip?
I think it is. I think that it might, even if we don't say that it's conclusive evidence, I think it's certainly like defeasible evidence, isn't it? Like it's. I mean, I'm not suggesting that one needs to like be certain of every one of their experiences, but I don't see why it's not some kind of evidence for Philip, well, if it's not evidence for us hearing Philip talk about it.
Maybe there are defeaters
of
your experience, whereas there isn't a defeater of our properly basic belief in the world of physical objects around us. For example, it seems to me a defeater of this claim of undifferentiatedness that there are moral distinctions.
Not all distinctions fall away. There are still some distinctions.
Think more about the moral stuff. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, I'd snubbed a question. Oh, let's take this question at the very end of the aisle there, glasses on the head. And then if you keep it real quick, I can get to the gentleman I snubbed a moment ago before we finish.
Thank you. My question's for Jessica. You were speaking a lot about kind of morality and how it's connected to a belief in the kind of immaterial or a kind of consciousness. Do you think it's possible for more material or secular worldviews or societies to have coherent morals? And if so, like, where would they come from?
Great question.
Yeah, good question. I mean, okay, so it depends what you mean by material. So you're materialist in the sense that you just don't believe that there is such a thing as the mind. And you could be, I know people who are like full-scale Darwinian material machinists. and the mind is not really doing anything. But I think, put it this way, whatever it is that the mind does, when it builds a bridge, mind's like you're sitting there, you work, you see things, you use your inference. I'm really interested in inference. Whatever inference is, whether it's mental or material, it's the thing that is the calculative process by which you gather data, you sift it, you use it to work out some generalized truths. Now you can do things like prediction, and you can then manipulate the physical world. And all that stuff enables you to make a bridge that, thank goodness, works. I think about this a lot every time I take an airplane. So even whatever the materialist is doing to explain that process, they're speaking about something that others would call mind. And I think that inferential process, more and more I feel like Plato, when he talks about how we use maths, Plato started with maths, he's a Pythagorean, and he's like, something's going on here that the mind is doing. It's speaking to a reality out there. And then it looks at like concepts, and you're like, concepts, it's speaking to, it keeps working. And he goes up and he goes to values of different kinds. And he eventually gets to things like truth, beauty, and the good, and this strange agreement in certain respects that we seem to have. They're transcendentals. So I think that, yes, I'm not sure I think it really matters whether you call yourself a materialist or call yourself a mental realmist. Whatever the functions that are what we do with our minds that interact with realities out there and are able to construct more realities, that I think is tied into all that we do, art, science, morality, as well.
Okay, we've got our final question here. I'm always hesitant to take a question from a heckler. Let's see how this goes.
I bet you I can make everybody hear me. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you loud and clear, yeah.
Okay. To the esteemed panel, far more educated on this than I am. But folks, you aren't proving anything, and you aren't getting very far. And it's because of us poor little mice of only being able to use 15% of our brains. And at some point when we can learn and expand, and you may have had that with a chemical that just stripped away whatever blocks us from using more neurons in our head.
Or less.
15%.
Yep. And you got an existential experience of a higher power.
Do you want to ask?
You may have been raged, but the question is, what direction does electricity flow? Does it go with the electrons, or does it go with the holes that are left by the electrons? That's the question you folks are trying to answer.
I'm glad I'm not on the panel to answer this difficult question.
So, the question is, can you answer that?
Would you like to? Can you put a bow on it as well, so we can?
Oh, blimey.
Finish up.
I was just going to fill some space while everyone else thinks, but I can't speak to the electrons, and I'm going to think about that very deeply all night and hopefully come up with an answer later. I think the thing about the mind capacity is kind of interesting, right? Whereas we're answering the questions about the mystery of existence, the story of everything, the fundamental origin of, and we have this very limited range of empirical data coming in. We've got this very limited range of mind stuff we can do. And I think at least that it's actually really useful to just be aware of our limits. That's one of the things the Enlightenment gave us that we want to stick with. I also at the same time think I'm tired of nihilism and skepticism, being like, we can't say anything, nothing is anything. These structures that we use to build bridges means there's extreme inferential power and predictive power in our minds. So we're trying to, I think one of the questions of modernity, how to balance what we are amazingly can do and know with being true to what we can't and don't. That's
Wonderful.
all.
It's a lovely place to end. Please, go on.
Moses came down with the 10 Commandments, and he gave them to the Jewish people. He also figured out shortly thereafter they can't follow it. They can't handle 10. So he sent Jesus down, and Christ gave us 1, and we still can't handle it.
I've got one commandment, which is to make sure we finish on time, but thank you for your questions. Please join me in thanking everyone working behind the scenes, and our wonderful panelists. Thank you to you as well for coming. See you next time. Thank you. You can, I'm still on, I'm still on. You can grab one of the panelists at the book table if you want to ask a quick question before you disappear. For those of you joining us on the 5th and the 7th, can't wait to see you again. Thank you again for supporting these shows. And safe trip home. Thank you again.